Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Turn of Light by Julie E. Czerneda, narrated by Jayden. 1. Jenn Nalynn dug her toes deeper into the sweet meadow grass and scowled at the river sparkling in the distance. For good measure, she scowled at the golden fields spread between the crags that cradled Marrowdell in sun-kissed arms, then at the blue arch of sky that dared be dotted by clouds whiter than the daisies nodding shoulder-high around her. Even the small village nestled by the river had taken on a glow, its crude wooden structures burnished rich bronze. Home. She scowled at it, too, so fiercely her eyebrows almost met. A cage was a cage. 18 days from now, not counting today, she'd turn 19. Adult at last, with all that meant. Freedom, choice, adventure. She'd urged the summer to end, accepting the daisies, eager to start her travels. Wasn't it cooperating? Just yesterday, old Jupp had complained fall was in a hurry. His joints could tell. Everyone agreed the weather couldn't make its mind up this year, so best be ready for an early change. Sure enough, today purple asters with eyes of gold bloomed like a royal cloak all around her. All for naught, because her dear doting father wanted her married before she left home. Jenn sighed and dropped her gaze to the flowers spilling over her lap. Someone thought she needed cheering up. "Thanks," she mumbled, though the last thing she wanted right now was to make daisy crowns. Her fingers fretted at a stem. It snapped instead of split. She plucked petals instead. Go. Pluck. Stay. Pluck. Go. Pluck. Stay. Pluck. Petals began to fly like snow, and an approaching butterfly thought better of coming close. Go. Stay. What do you think? Given the little meadow where the girl sat was home to nothing larger than butterflies, single-minded bees, and the occasional indiscreet mouse, it would seem unlikely she expected an answer. But this wasn't any meadow. This was hers. Too close to the old trees, too close to the bone hills, too close to sunset's first, deepest shadows. Night's edge, the settlers called it, and no one else came here, which made it hers. For as long as she could remember, Jenn had come to Night's Edge as often as chores and her father allowed. From harvest till planting, she'd run across the fallow fields, past the empty farm, to where her meadow waited within its shelter of dark pines. Now, at summer's end, with ripe grain bending the stalks, she walked the longer way within the cool shade of the Tinker's Road, or road, if she could borrow Wayne Uthoff's pony. How didn't matter, so long as she could be here, where she was never alone. Sure enough, a voice softer than the petals in her hand warmed her ear. Go home. Stay home. Both. Sunset's close, dearest heart. It's time you left. Jenn's round cheeks flushed, and her eyes flashed rebellion. It's too soon. I don't want to go home. Not yet. She flung the petals into the air. The air shimmered. Snap, snap. The petals disappeared. You must leave before the sun touches the bone hills. I shouldn't need to remind you. The note of aggrieved, if tolerant, patience was a perfect match for her aunt's. Today's reason Jenn had fled to the meadow. Something about hems, or had it been husbands? Her aunt's speeches on proper deportment and dignity blurred to a sameness on rainy days, let alone when the sun peeked in the windows and birds sang. She hadn't paid proper attention, Jenn thought contritely. Instead, she'd squirmed until her aunt threw up her hands in atypical frustration and shooed her away. Had the point been to hem a husband, or husband a hem? Was one behemmed, or behusbanded? Jenn laughed. The sparkling sound brought up the nose of a curious digger, crowned with a moist dab of soil. Nearer the forest, a rabbit paused, ears flapped back to listen for the swoop of an early hunting owl, and found the strength to jump into the safety of a thorn bush. While on the northward road, a weary stranger lifted his head and caught the scent of sun-warmed pine. "You shouldn't mock what keeps you safe." She'd laughed at her own silliness, not in disrespect. Well, not exactly. Jenn dumped the remaining flowers from her lap and drew up her knees. Her skirt, the one with the hem she wasn't supposed to drag in damp grass, presumably, in case of husbands, she tucked snugly around her ankles to discourage curious aunts. "I've rules enough at home, Wisp," she complained. "I don't need more from you. Night's the same here as anywhere else." Except for being forbidden to her, like the rest of the world. "I'd like to stay." "No, no, no." The shimmering spot beside her on the hill began to whirl, the long rays of late afternoon sun picking out confused motes of dust caught by its frenzy, yellow pollen spiraling up in streaks of gold. "You can't. You mustn't." The little whirlwind swept up the ruined flowers and spun them into chains. "Go, or it will be dark." Dark. Her lips twitched. "I'd never finish my outside chores if I worried about the dark. Besides, there's a lovely full moon tonight. Really, you make no sense at all, Wisp." Neither did husbands. Jenn's small round chin jutted in defiance. Her father knew full well she was free to leave Marrowdell. To be fair, he hadn't said she could go at 19, but he hadn't said she couldn't. Had he? What he had said, far too often this summer, and again at breakfast, was that fall was the season favored by the ancestors for weddings, and how happy he'd be when she and her older sister took husbands. What possible use would a husband be? There wasn't a filled set of pants in the village interested in anything outside the valley. Making them fools. There was so very much outside. Marrowdell might be in the back pocket of beyond, but Master Uthoff was as good a teacher as any in Roth, and they had books. Books that spoke of innumerable wonders. Oceans and plains. Creatures with legs like trees, and minds that dove to the heart of the earth. Jenn's curiosity stole the rest from her sleep. Her peace when awake. Outside must be what she longed for so desperately. This summer, as the light of each day faded, she felt emptier than the day before, as if she slowly starved from the lack of what? She didn't know, only that it wasn't here. She'd know it when she found it. It had to be among the wonders she dreamed about. It had to be. Which led back to husbands, her father, and her visiting aunt. Her aunt's stories of life in Avio, the great capital of Roth, made her longing worse. chandeliers and peaches, parties and dances. Her aunt, who carried her campaign to salvage the manners of her widowed brother's so neglected daughters to the supper table, regardless of its impact on anyone's digestion, meaning shoes. "I won't mind being late for supper," Jenn announced with great sincerity, digging her bare, happy toes deeper into the sod. "Let me stay just a little longer. Please?" The pollen stilled, a column of dust leaning toward earth. A flower-scented whisper caressed her cheek. "If you answer not to law, dearest heart, answer friendship. Go home now. For me. Because I ask it. I wish you safe." "That's not fair." "Neither is abandoning your father and sister to fend for themselves. Hurry to save them, dearest heart. Good heart." Good-hearted Jenn. That's what everyone said of her, usually before asking a favor. The bane of her life, she decided, vowing to work on being strong-minded. Tomorrow. Jenn gently brushed the line of ants from her skirt, lifting the hem by handfuls to check for stains. "I hope you know—" She paused, lips parted. There, in the shadow of her skirt, the tip of a claw. Not like a hawk's or chicken's. Not like any of the bear's claws hung above Uncle Horst's fireplace. This was a blade of ancient bone, as long as her longest finger. The underside of its elegant, deadly curve was serrated, as if the needle-like tip was insufficient threat. One glimpse, then it lifted into the light and was gone. "What I'll have to put up with," Jenn finished as she stood. Over the years, there'd been other shadows, other glimpses. A tuft of wiry hair, curled like the end of a beard, paired tendrils of what might have been steam, or breath. A patch of textured cloth or skin that had reminded her of woven chain, but tighter, smoother, as fine as the best linen. Now, a claw. Wisp didn't want to be seen. That much she understood. If she reacted to a glimpse, he'd shred grass and sulk. She couldn't imagine a shape that fit the glimpses, let alone how Wisp kept the rest of himself from sight. Nothing in Marrowdell, and nothing in any book she'd read, held such a being. He might let her see the whole of him one day. She sighed inwardly. Might. One day. The world kept its best secrets from her and demanded she wait and wait and wait. It wasn't fair. "I'll go home before sunset," Jenn said, resigned for now. "If I didn't, Aunt Sib would fuss." "Dear heart." A contrite breeze tickled the fringe of pale hair on her forehead. "Your aunt means well." She did. Their father's sister was neither hardy nor young, but every year she undertook a pilgrimage to Marrowdell for the summer, bringing dry goods and cloth for dresses, impractical shoes for her nieces, and a pair of her husband's barely worn boots for her brother, books and biscuits, and delicious hard candy. Best of all, she brought stories of life in the great cities, for Sib Mahavar's impeccably Rothan marriage had saved her from the politics that sent so many of Mellon heritage to the North Woods. She and her coach would head south again after Jenn's birthday, her coach of black and gilt that smelled inside of leather and lavender. When they were little, Jenn and Pegs had played in it, closing the doors and pretending they traveled along Avio's magnificent cobbled streets, waving at imaginary passerby out the windows. "That's it!" Jenn pushed her hair back. "You're brilliant, Wisp." "I am." The breeze flipped her bangs forward again, then paused as if confused. "Why am I?" "I don't know why I didn't think of it before. Aunt Sib has lots of room. They have a huge house, bigger than all the homes of Marrowdell put together. All we have to do, she couldn't leave her sister to take over all the chores, is climb in her coach and hide." The breeze went from tickle to grit-heavy shove. "What's wrong with you?" Jenn caught her balance, coughing, eyes wide. She hadn't meant it. She'd been daydreaming out loud. "Go home." A breath in her ear. "Stay home." Another. Then, so feather-soft she might have imagined it, save for the uneasy stir of fine hair along her neck. "Never leave." "I won't spend the rest of my life here. Not for my father, and not for you." Jenn tossed back her head, braid thumping her shoulder, and stomped away through the meadow, skirt gathered in her hands and uncaring where she stepped, though somehow her feet missed both asters and ants. She wouldn't come back tomorrow, she fumed, or the next day, or the next. Let the opinionated wind play with mice and bees. Serve him right. She hadn't been serious. Now she was. No matter what anyone planned for her, she'd find a way to leave Marrowdell and see the world. She would. "Oh, that went well," from above. Sarcasm from his peers wasn't safe to ignore. The being Jenn Nalynn knew as Wisp shrugged his shoulders, which were in no sense like hers, and made his slow way to the shelter of the old trees and what lay beyond. "She'll be back." "And if not?" A different speaker from below. They cared not for the pretty meadow, nor did they waste effort to bend its fragrant air into words. "What then?" From behind. They circled him, mocked his care-filled steps with their grace and speed and power, buffeted him with wind. They didn't dare touch him. Power he still had. From above. "Will you fail?" They'd crossed hoping for trouble. His penance, their amusement. Once word spread of the girl's outburst, would there be bodies pressed against bodies for their next meeting? Had they nothing better to do? He'd supply a pestilence to keep them occupied, a whimsical something with pus and a fearsome itch, but those whose opinions did matter would know. Know, and likely visit it on him threefold. Instead, Wisp shrugged what weren't shoulders once more. "She'll be back." He would miss her, however long frustration kept her from the meadow this time. She'd grown dear to him, goodness and bright expectation being rare in his life, something he hoped no one discovered, or that life would swiftly become a greater misery. Of course, should Jenn Nalynn, Turnborn and forever cursed, try to leave the valley, his would be the first teeth in her throat. He would regret that most of all. 2. The pound of Jenn's calloused feet on the packed earth was almost as loud as the pound of her heart. Wisp and his stupid law and silly tricks. He was worse than her father. Much worse. At least Rad Nalynn truly needed her. She helped him in the gristmill as much as she could, and did her share, almost always, in the gardens and around the house. Little wonder his cheerful face would cloud whenever she or Pegs talked of life beyond Marrowdell. How could he manage without them? If Aunt Sib could stay year-round to keep house for him, everything would be different. But she had a home of her own, a better one, in Avio. As for her father taking another wife, Jenn shook her head. Even if he'd been willing, and let it be known, Marrowdell was home to just 2 unmarried women of the right age. Rhys Naham had her hands full with her great-uncle's household, and Wen Treff talked to toads. Jenn paused at the river to hitch her skirt well above her knees, though this time of year most of the ford was ankle-deep. The low sun caught every dancing ripple, dazzling the eye and making it impossible to discern shallow from whole. Best be safe than soggy. The cool water soothed skin, prickled by grass and ants, and eased the burn of the roadway from her soles. By the time she reached the rushes, dancing with black damselflies, who flashed vivid blue as they tilted their curious heads at her, the river had washed away her temper as well. Wisp was wisp, Jenn chided herself. As well expect sense from Wayne's old pony, who would oh so cleverly find his way through any latch to eat himself sick on fallen apples. Both needed to be loved and properly managed. Her next visit to Night's Edge, she'd take Wisp some of the thistledown she'd collected for a new pillow. He liked to fling the fluff-tailed seeds high and wide, so they caught the wind and headed for the upper meadows. Why, he never explained. Glimpsing a white pebble under the water, she gathered her skirt and stooped to collect it, adding the small damp treasure to the others in her pocket. White was best, and hard to find. At least others said so. Jenn felt quite pleased with herself as she walked out of the river and up the slight slope. The dry sand was warm underfoot until she reached the shade of the massive oak that marked this end of the village proper. The tree had a wide, curved branch it would lower, if asked politely, for a child who wanted to watch for travelers on the Tinker's Road. Or a vantage point to throw acorns. Squirrels excelled at that. With their help, the shade of the oak would be brown with fallen acorns. To judge by those already on the ground, they'd started. It'd soon be time to open the gate to let the big sows amble through. Satin never minded a child lying on her warm, broad back, or acorn throwing, especially close to her clever snout. Filigree, though covered in pretty black spots, had no patience when feasting, and, if bothered, she'd grunt a terse command to the hanging branch, which would shake loose both child and acorns. For now, the tree was empty of children and the gate closed. Jenn climbed its cedar rails and jumped down the other side. The road led through the commons, as her aunt called the pasture where the villagers kept livestock in summer. High hedges surrounded it, full of twittering birds and the deep drone of bees. Davy Treff's great draft horses stood slack-hipped and nose to tail with Aunt Sib's fine-matched bays in the shade of the trees by the pond. The sows and himself, their lordly, if lazy boar, lay in the pond's shallows and wagged their long ears at flies. Good enough, the Rop's pampered bull must be hiding behind the shed again. The cows crowded the middle gate, anxious to be milked. Seeing them, Jenn picked up her pace. Must be closer to supper time than she'd thought. This year's weanlings, a tight little herd of brown and white, pranced toward her through the thick grass, huge eyes brimming with curiosity, then suddenly lost all interest and turned their attention to a game of headbutt. Last year's calves and the riding horses, all but Uncle Horst's and Dewsom's, grazed the ravines beyond Marrowdell under the watchful eyes of the Ems twins, Alan and Tad. Bandits didn't set foot in the valley, but menaced anyone on the northward road. Every so often, a horse or calf would manage to get itself stuck or slip into a chancy mountain stream. Not that many, she'd heard, were as dangerous as the deadly cataracts that roared between the tips of the Bone Hills. Come fall, the animals would be brought back through the village and led into the fields after the harvest, there to fatten with the rest of the livestock till frost. Maybe this fall, Alan Ems would realize she had no intention of marrying him, ever, and Tad would break his abashed silence to speak his heart to Pegs. Then again, Jenn grumbled to herself, some things never changed. Come winter, everything else did. Here, snow didn't conveniently melt, as in the cities to the south. Marrowdell shrank to narrow, icy paths between homes, barns, privies, and larders, those structures roofed in white. When the weather permitted, Davy would take his team from the village to the more trafficked northward road and back, the horses' huge feet and wide chests doing what they could to keep a passage open. After storms, every adult who could lift a shovel or rake helped dig out the road. It was that or risk being cut off from the outside until spring. Isolated, an entire village could die unnoticed by starvation, fire, illness, to be smothered by snow. With the sun warming her shoulders, the road dry and warm beneath her feet, Jenn found it hard to imagine winter. Fall, yes. By her birthday, the grain fields would be harvested, their bounties stored as feed and flour. Larders were already filling with that from gardens and orchards, sacks of dried beans, jars of jellies, chutneys, and pickles, precious pots of honey, and onion braids. Wheels of pale cheese and crocks of brined butter rested in the cool dark of the spring house, while sausages and hams, last year's piglets, hung in fragrant smoke. Soon they'd press apples for cider and dig the root crops. The children would collect rushes and down from nests by the river. The older ones would gather kindling. Charcoal bins were already full, fuel for the cold months, and barrels of ash stood waiting. They'd be traded this fall for a share of lye in Enshire. No one in the village had the knack. Jenn climbed the far gate, more mindful of her skirt within the village proper. Singed Treff looked up from berry picking and smiled, her big hat tilted so the sun caught her freckles. From the clanging, her husband Davy was busy at his forge. Off to milk the cows, Hetty Ropp and her stepmother, Covey, waved a cheerful greeting. Chuffy and his sister Alyssa went ahead, arms wrapped around empty milk jugs almost as tall as they were, laughing as they tried to bump into one another. Birds chirped in the apple trees, laden with fruit that filled the heart of the village. Zer Ems whistled as he worked on his house. Supper smells filled the air. Everyone was busy. Everyone content. Jenn scowled. Didn't they know? The world was bigger than this. Dark and twisted trees, skirted in moss, lined the road. Their tips leaned together, hiding the sky. The road twisted as well, hiding its future and past. A fine place for an ambush, Ben and Larmansu thought, and didn't care. There'd been a time he'd have been on alert, his every sense tuned to the limb out of place, the rock ready to fall, the deadly lurkers in the brush. No longer. Roth's prince had lured the merchants of Eldad to his bed at last, with Vorkun and the Eastern Marches the dowry. What generations of raids and thievery couldn't defeat, a stroke of a pen.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?